Bad Takes in Football with another episode. Really excited to get into today's topics. Just to really quickly cover what we're going to go over today. First things first, Rashee Rice had a ruling come out from his court case from a car accident last year. So we'll dive into that, what that means for him, as well as the Kansas City Chiefs. Next, we'll go over Mike Williams' retirement, how that can impact the Chargers, as well as potentially a homecoming for a receiver that they had for a long-standing time, all-pro caliber type receiver. So we'll get into that. Also going to dive into the latest injury with defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions. Obviously, they are a Super Bowl contender and a Super Bowl favorite amongst many pundits and fans, so we'll get into that and how that could impact the Detroit Lions this year. And finally, we'll talk about the excitement of the fact that the training camp is starting for the majority of the teams out there. So a lot of topics to cover today. Really excited to get into all of it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, first topic today, Rashee Rice. Really interesting situation that happened here. Obviously, very sad situation, more specifically, and I'll go into that. So first off, Rashee Rice, for those that do not know, Rashee Rice got into a car accident where he was essentially racing on the street during a heavily trafficked timeline, right? And he actually ended up really badly injuring a lot of people, like several people with this car crash. And because of that, he was facing a lot of scrutiny for his off the field issues. This wasn't the first time that he's really gotten into trouble, right? Regardless, a lot of this has played out throughout this past year. There were several delays in a ruling, but that ruling actually came out. So I'll go ahead and dive into that real quick. 1 second. There we go. All right. So as you can see really quickly from the actual headline itself, Rashee Rice, he was sentenced to 30 days, sorry, not 30 years, 30 days in jail. Now, some interesting aspects of this I want to make sure to cover is, first things first, the fact that it's 30 days. Something that's really important to kind of talk about and mention when we talk about 30 days is he's actually allowed to serve those 30 days whenever he would actually like. I find that to be pretty interesting. They were obviously, the court was very accommodating to the fact that he does sort of have a unique lifestyle and a unique profession in the sense that there is a season for it, right? That isn't necessarily always common. There's the common person, the everyday person, the everyday fan of the NFL. Generally, they're going to work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Sometimes some, will work weekends, whatever that might look like. Regardless, it's not like they're facing a 17-game season with a chance to play more if they perform well enough, right? And so there's a big difference in what that lifestyle looks like. And obviously, the court was appealing to the fact that he is an NFL player. And has a unique lifestyle and schedule. So he is able to actually serve that time when it works best for him. So I think, one, that is a plus for him as well as the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not like right after this ruling was sent out, he was put into jail immediately, right? So that's one thing to make sure to explain to all of you. Second, he's on 5 years of probation. Now, 5 years is a long time to be on probation in general. That's a long time to be on probation, especially for someone that has other issues that have come into play. I know that there's been a marijuana possession issue that he has had. He failed the drug test. And so with that being said, Rashee Rice has to walk a very tight line for really the next 5 years If something else comes up, he has a really good chance of getting a lot more trouble than just 30 days of jail time. And so that's going to be really important to see come into play. Who's going to put Rashee under, Rashee Rice under their wing? If I'm Patrick Mahomes, I have a tracker on him for the next 5 years. I am watching him like a hawk for the next 5 years. And really the reasoning for this and why I say all that is because of these numbers right here. And I know it doesn't seem super exciting or super telling, right? We don't have a lot of games to actually work with when it comes to Rashee Rice's career, but his rookie season, he had 102 targets. That is not common for a rookie receiver to see, especially on a substantialized and established team like the Kansas City Chiefs, who, obviously I don't think they're known for their receivers now, right? They had Tyreek Hill in the past. They haven't had Travis Kelce, who's really been their cornerstone of their passing game, this entire time. So it's not like they have had marquee receivers, but at the same time, again, Rashee Rice, 102 targets. He caught 79 passes his rookie season for almost 1,000 yards, and on top of that, he had 7 touchdowns. Maybe it's different for me because I'm coming from a team. My team, the Ravens, are, I would say, not known for their receivers. So when I look at a rookie with over 900 yards and 7 touchdowns, I get excited about that. To me, that shows a lot of promise. To me, that shows a lot of hope, and it shows that he can be an impact player, right? I think that is very obvious when I look at these numbers. Now, last year, his sophomore season, I should say, he obviously had a down year, but a lot of that again came from injury. So not only is Rashee Rice facing off the field issues, right? But he also had an ACL injury last year that cut his schedule short. He essentially really only played in 3 games. His fourth game, he got hurt almost immediately. Didn't have any catches or targets in that game. But in a very short season, he had almost 300 yards and 2 touchdowns on 24 catches. Right, that is an impact player. That is someone that Patrick Mahomes can use on a regular basis. Because the other aspect of this, and really why I think this is even more important, is the fact that if you look at the depth chart of the, and let me move myself here 1 second, just so that everyone can see, right? If you actually look at this depth chart, and if it's hard to read, I apologize. I'll make sure to try to, hold on 1 second. Let me try to zoom in a little bit here. All right, hopefully that's a little bit more legible for everyone. But if you look at if you really look at their depth chart, right? I think one important aspect to really focus on and touch on here is the fact that, you're talking about Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown being your other top 2 receivers. And then I would probably put Juju Smith-Schuster behind them, right? Juju Smith-Schuster, I'll tell you this, he almost single-handedly helped them win a Super Bowl a couple years ago, right? He had a fantastic campaign for them, especially in the playoffs, but helped a lot in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. But he's not necessarily the guy anymore. He seems to be waived or let go or not renewed a contract by the Chiefs, tries to go somewhere else to play, doesn't seem to necessarily get any traction there. And I think they like him enough that they generally always bring him back, right? Andy Reid must be a fan of Juju Smith-Schuster. I've seen him go on and off this roster a couple times in the past year, I would say. Again, he does have an impact, and so they keep him, but Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, what do you think about when you think of these receivers? I think of small and speed, right? I also am concerned about durability from that perspective. And so that's something that is really important to look at when you look at the makeup of this team, right? Rashee Rice, already has an injury, right? Major injury, ACL injury. And then he has the off the field issues. Xavier Worthy. I weighed about as much as Xavier Worthy when I was 12. It might even be 10. I'm not even 100% sure, but I know that he is not necessarily built for a long season, in my opinion. Hollywood Brown can't seem to stay on the field for any period of time, right? If you look at if you look at Hollywood Brown's career, he had 9 catches for 91 yards last year because of injuries, right? That is not dependable, in my opinion. That's not reliable. So I'll zoom out real fast so we can see a little bit better. But if you look at these seasons, the best year he had was in Baltimore almost 4 years ago in 2021 when he had 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. He hasn't had a season over 800 yards since then, right? 709 with his first year in Arizona. So if you look at the games being played, ever since he's left Baltimore, he played 12 games his first year in Arizona, played 14 games his second year, and then he had 2 games last year. So you're talking about a receiver that has off the field issues and a major injury. You're talking about Xavier Worthy, who was available all last year. I'll give him that. But he's a very specific type of wide receiver. He doesn't necessarily have the build of a wide receiver one, that can play on the outside and consistently get one-on-one coverage or double coverage and be able to fight through that. Again, he has that speed though. It's game-changing speed. It's season-changing speed, in my opinion. But how long can he stay durable? And then you have Hollywood Brown, another guy very similar to Xavier Worthy. He's known for his speed, but he's not the biggest guy, and he's also not able to stay on the field all the time. So I really do think that Rashee Rice's off the field issues and this hearing are going to have a big impact on the Kansas City Chiefs. A big topic of conversation and a lot of what people are wondering right now are how many games is Rashee Rice going to get suspended for, right? The NFL is definitely going to be suspending Rashee Rice for this hearing. They're essentially waiting for the legal process to move forward before they actually provided their own punishment. And from what I understand, it's going to be a multi-game suspension. Now, multi-game is very vague. That could be as little as 2, right? But that could be the whole season. Now, I don't expect it to be the whole season. Really, for me, I would expect this to be more so 4 games to 8 games, right? Anywhere between 4 to 8 games is really where I see this going. If they give him 4 games, I think that's still a little light, in my opinion, for all of the issues he's had off the field already. Again, this car accident is just one of the situations. He has been in trouble multiple times with the NFL already at this point. And so for me, I would be shocked if it's 4. I think it should be closer to 6. 6 to 8, based off of what he's done, I think is really the right thing to do from the NFL's perspective, and it also will send them a message. Because again, if you're Rashee Rice, a 4-game suspension when you're on the Kansas City Chiefs isn't as impactful, right? They have enough talent around them that they can work with that and make it through 4 games probably okay without him. 6 to 8 games, though, that really sends a message, in my opinion. And I think it's a message that Rashee Rice needs to hear. Nothing has happened since this car accident with him, but at the same time, the court was pretty lenient with you. I think a lot of people would tell you, Rashee, that you are very lucky for what you got. 5 years probation is scary from a sense that if you get in trouble again, it's a big deal. But that's also under the guess that you are going to get in trouble again. And so you got to think about it like that. And, again, he doesn't have any leeway to make more mistakes right now. Not just from the NFL perspective, but personally, right? That could put him in legal trouble if he were to do something else to get, from a legal perspective. So again, I'm very curious to see how this impacts the Kansas City Chiefs. They have a bad taste in their mouth from what happened to them in the Super Bowl. I think they're going to hit the ground running this year. I wouldn't necessarily put them in the Bengals category when it comes to slow starts in the NFL. I do think that it does take a little bit of time, as it does with most teams, to get their offense humming, right? Generally, their defense starts out pretty lights out right off the bat, and it takes a little bit of time for their offense to get going. And I think that based off of what happened to them in the Super Bowl, I don't see them having as slow of a start. So I'm very, very curious to see what happens from that perspective. Going into the next topic, again, I don't think this is necessarily groundbreaking information or this is going to change the makeup of the NFL too much, but I did want to cover the fact that Mike Evans is retiring from the NFL. Now, Mike Williams, to me, is a solid, very consistent receiver. Never had off the field issues. Never heard anything about him being a bad locker room guy. And he had a really solid career with the Chargers. He had a very short stint last year where he was on the Jets and then also on the Steelers. But he made a decision to come back to the Chargers in March, and he signed a 1-year deal. Now, interesting aspect to me is the fact that he decided somewhat recently that he wanted to retire. I've seen this happen before with other players, and generally does tend to happen around training camp. And I think a little bit of this has to do with the fact that, they probably thought about the fact that, hey, I got to go to training camp. This grind starts all over again in a week. Do I want to do this? And there probably was a part of him that decided he didn't have it in him anymore, right? I think there's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of time, there's countless effort from yourself, but then also your family, right? You're away from your family for a while during the season. You're not able to be the same member of your family when you're in the NFL, right? It takes up a lot of your time. And so I think if I were to really look at this and glean as to why, I think he probably looked at it and said to himself, do I really want to do this, and is it worth it? And obviously to him it wasn't. And I'll go over his numbers really quick in a second, but again, the reason why I really wanted to talk about this is because I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens from this move, right? From Mike Williams retiring, and I'll go into that in a second. But let's look at his numbers really quick, just so you can get a feel for the type of career he had first off, but then also, kind of the other thing I'll mention is sort of the drop off a little bit there. So I'm going to share this really quick. Again, he got drafted in 2017. Had, I would say, a pretty unproductive rookie year, but then really quickly started to actually improve, right? So his second year, he had 43 catches for 664 yards. The following year, 49 catches for over 1,000, right? I didn't mention also in that second year, he had 10 touchdowns, right? So he became a productive member of the Chargers that year and really impacted their team. Now, what I would say is there was definitely a drop-off that happened right after the 2022 season, right? So again, I'm not sitting here telling you Mike Williams retiring is a huge deal necessarily to the Chargers. I think it does have an impact, and we'll see what that impact looks like, as we continue moving forward. But if you look here, I'm looking at last year's receiving numbers, right? And I think it's kind of interesting to mention a couple things. One, Ladd was clearly the number one for them, right? 112 targets. He caught 82 of those for almost 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. First off, amazing pick for my dynasty fantasy league. I'll mention the fact that I did draft him very early on last year as a rookie in my dynasty league. You have Quentin Johnston, who I think had a pretty disappointing rookie year. I think a lot of people were looking at him as a potential bust. But thankfully for Quentin and for the Chargers, I really do think he had a pretty turnaround year last year. He had 711 receiving yards for 8 touchdowns, right? 8 touchdowns. I don't care how many yards you have, like you're impacting the team in a positive way. Josh Palmer, I'm a big fan of his. I think he's a solid receiver. Generally is most known for what I would say is like his go routes. But again, he had almost 600 yards and he only had one touchdown last year, right? And so definitely not necessarily the most impactful number 3 receiver, but still I think helpful in this sense. Now, I'm looking at this and you might say like, hey, those are 3 receivers, like not a huge deal about Mike Williams. There's really one other guy that I'm wondering, like, and I'm assuming I already actually at this point like have at least gotten a phone call, right? And I'll go into that. It's the obvious one. It's Keenan Allen, right? Keenan Allen, who was on the Chargers team for 10 plus years, right? He had multiple Pro Bowl seasons. He had multiple and actually like back to back to back 1,000 plus yard seasons. He was the major weapon for the Chargers for the longest time. It was Keenan Allen, right? You had the Antonio Gates era. Antonio Gates and him overlapped somewhat, but it quickly became Keenan Allen's offense, passing offense at least, while he was there. Keenan Allen had a great year last year. I would consider it, right? So he played for the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams, rookie quarterback. They brought in Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen. They had this scary passing attack. I wouldn't say it worked out super well for them, but 70 receptions for 744 yards and 7 touchdowns. He can still make an impact in the NFL and on a team in a very positive way. I would expect Keenan Allen to be close to those numbers again this year. Now, is he one of those players now that's going to wait, say, hey, like, I'm old enough, I don't need to go through training camp, especially if it's with the Chargers. Like, I know this team, I know the makeup of this team like the back of my hand. Like, I want to wait until after training camp to sign. That's definitely a possibility. I don't think it's the smartest move if that's actually the case, though. Purely for one specific reason, that's the fact that he hasn't really spent a lot of time with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, right? So those are 2 very different and new pieces for him in the Chargers organization that he would need to be comfortable with and be familiar with. So I hope that if he does end up going back to the Chargers, he gets back there as soon as possible. We can definitely see what happens with that. But again, I think the Mike Williams retirement isn't just Mike Williams retiring. It's what's next for the Chargers. I think a lot of people, I'll say the media, I'll say fans, they're expecting the Chargers to have a turnaround year. And I won't say turnaround year in the sense that they were really bad last year, but there's a lot of people that are thinking they could contend with the Chiefs for that AFC West title, right? Them, the Broncos, the Chiefs, right? That first off, it's a tough conference, but there are people that think the Chargers could actually do something in that division. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I would expect to see, if they do make an addition, I expect to see that happen pretty shortly. The Chargers actually started camp last week, because they're in the Hall of Fame game. The Hall of Fame game will be next week. I think it's next Saturday. I'm not 100% sure. I know it's like the end of the month. It's like the 30th. So maybe it's like next Wednesday or Thursday. Sorry. But I believe it's on like July 30th. So they needed to come into camp a week early to get ready for that game. I would expect someone to be at least signed by then. They might not be there, but I expect someone to be signed because let's be honest, no starters really play in the Hall of Fame game, so I wouldn't expect whoever gets it added to that team to be there. One other story I wanted to cover today, just purely because the Lions are an interesting team to me, right? In a couple different ways, and I'll share a little bit more about what I mean by that in a second. But to me, the Lions like last year, had probably the worst injury bug of any team, right? I think it was pretty obvious to me and to others that they had the makeup to be a Super Bowl team. They had the offense, they had the defense, they had the coaching, right? Dan Campbell, that guy is crazy, but I love him. I love Dan Campbell. I mean, he is the type of coach that I feel like is infectious. Obviously, I feel like he has to have the right types of players to buy into his craziness, and I think he found those players. But Dan Campbell turned around that Detroit Lion team. I am a huge fan of Dan Campbell and what he's been able to do with that team. It seems to me like a bunch of guys that are pretty blue collared with a chip on their shoulder. And then they have a Ferrari in the background, in the backfield, with also like a Hummer, right? You got you got Jahmyr Gibbs, who I would consider to be a Ferrari. That guy is so impressive. And then you have David Montgomery, who is the tank that can just run over people. So I think they have the makeup, and the reason why, again, why I want to talk about Levi's ACL surgery and his injury isn't just because I want to talk about like people being injured. It's because this is going to have an impact on their team. The defensive tackle position is a position in the NFL and in football in general that doesn't get as much credit for what is actually done on a day-to-day basis. Every single day, Levi comes into the office and he pushes 300 plus pounds against someone that is also 300 plus pounds that's trying to push him, right? That happens in practice 60 plus times, and in games, 30 to 40 to 50 plus times, depending on how many snaps he gets per game, a week. But that is taxing on a body. That is taxing on the brain, right? You are constantly trying to force your will upon another alpha male in the NFL. That is not easy to do. Every single one of these players is extremely tall, extremely strong, extremely athletic, and they all have chips on their shoulder. And the Lions just lost a guy that is going to day in, day out, fill holes in the trenches, stop the run game, hopefully get some pressure on the quarterback. That has a huge impact. When you look at an NFL team and NFL makeup, most teams carry 4 to 5 defensive tackles on a roster, on an active roster. And of that, most of them have to play in every single game because of how taxing it is on the human body. You have people rolling up on your ankles, stepping on your hands, arms, your body in general. Like it is grueling on the line, offensive and defensive line. And so losing a guy before the season even starts, that has a huge impact on your team. And I talked about this a little bit, but they had so many injuries last year, right? I was taking a look at this. David Montgomery had an issue that caused problems. Terrion Arnold, Kevin Zeitler, their guard, Mekhi Wingo, someone that's actually, going to be a big part of filling the hole of Levi's injury, right? Malcolm Rodriguez, they're I would say a great linebacker that they drafted out of college, out of Oklahoma State. Huge fan of him. Elam McNeil, Derek Barnes, Carlton Davis. Haven't even mentioned this one yet, but Aiden Hutchinson, right? Their defensive end. He led the league in sacks for like 4 years, or sorry, not 4 years, 4 weeks after even being injured, right? So Aiden Hutchinson was injured, and for 3 weeks after that was still leading the NFL in sacks, right? Eventually Trey Hendrickson caught up to him and passed him. But Aiden Hutchinson was the guy in the NFL at the beginning of the season last year. I think a lot of people aren't really necessarily thinking about that too much or talking about it because he did have a really bad leg injury. And I think a lot of people are kind of in this hurry up and wait situation to see what sort of shape Aiden Hutchinson is in and how much strength he has and if he's able to get off the ball strong. What does his push look like? What does his leverage look like? But losing Aiden Hutchinson was a huge deal. And they still got to the playoffs. They were number one team in the NFC. Now they lost their first game in the playoffs against the Commanders, who were super hot at the time, right? Shout out, Jaden Daniels for having that amazing run in the playoffs. But everyone entered last year's playoffs thinking the Lions were going to be the team. Marcus Davenport was another injury they had, another D end, right? So they had all these injuries last year, and they were still able to make it really far. And they had what I would consider to be a successful season, especially for the Detroit Lions. But this year, they're actually expecting more, right? Last year it was like, hey, I think they're going to do more. I think they have something special. It was still exciting, and everyone was still rooting for them. But when you're a team that sees success multiple years in a row, it starts to become expected from them, right? I think a good example of this would be the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, perennial AFC East champions. It seems like I feel like it's got to be the last 4 years at least that they've been the AFC East champions, and it's always the conversation, Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes, right? And they haven't been able to get over that hurdle. And so instead of everyone saying like the Buffalo Bills are this amazing team, they're awesome, they're great, they're going to win the Super Bowl, the storyline is Josh Allen can't beat Patrick Mahomes. They can't win the game when it matters. They can't win the big game. And so the Lions are going to get to a point, I think, where they're going to start getting that sort of attention and those sorts of expectations. Now, that's just noise, right? That's just media noise. So I'm not saying that that's like a huge problem for the Detroit Lions, but I'm just saying that is the direction of the team and where they're going because they are such a good team. So people expect them to do well. So I do think that this Levi injury is going to be a huge impact for them because again, it hasn't even started yet, right? If you look at his regular season last season, he had 1.5 sacks, he had 16 solo tackles, 12 assisted tackles. That doesn't seem to be groundbreaking by any means, but at the same time, it's not just those numbers and how defensive tackles impact a game. A lot of times they are making the blocks. They're attacking the offensive line and taking on blockers so that other people can make the play, right? And so when you don't have someone like Levi constantly being able to do that for you, that can lead to problems. I was looking at this as well just to kind of give you an idea. And here, I'll move myself again. Apologize about that. And let's see here. Maybe we'll zoom in here a little bit. Hopefully that's legible. Let me move this a little bit. But, I was taking a look at this. Again, DJ Reader, I would say he's a well-polished veteran that I expect to be able to be a day-in, day-out contributor to the Detroit Lions. I think that he's going to be even more crucial for them with this injury. Again, Alim McNeil, Mekhi Wingo, Talik Williams. Talik Williams is a rookie. They're obviously going to now expect a lot from him. I think he would have been a rotational player if you were to ask the Detroit Lions last week. But this week they're probably saying we're expecting him to be a key contributor. We need him to be a key contributor because, again, they have all these other guys behind them, but how impactful are they going to be able to be? You need to have, again, a solid 4 to 5 defensive tackle rotation. Generally, it's 4 in real games. To be able to stop the run and make sure to control that pocket, right? Try to force that pocket to close down. And so it's really it's really going to be interesting to see if they can withstand an entire NFL season with who they have. Like, are they going to look for other defensive tackles out there? I think it's very possible. We'll definitely take a look, but I think it's really possible. Last thing I'll mention, really, before getting into or before signing off, is the fact that, guys, training camp is starting today or tomorrow, really, for most teams, right? I was taking a look at this list, and you have the Arizona Cardinals, the Bills, the Panthers, the Bears, Bengals, Browns, Broncos, Packers, Texans, Colts, Jags, Rams, Dolphins, Patriots, Saints, Giants, Jets, Eagles, 49ers, Seahawks, Buccaneers, Titans, Commanders, and Baltimore Ravens, all starting their veteran training camp tomorrow, right? The Cowboys and the Chiefs, they reported yesterday, and the Steelers, they start Wednesday, right? That is, besides the two teams, I think it was the Chargers and the Giants. They started early because they're in the Hall of Fame game. Sorry, no, it's not the Giants, but the Chargers, they started early, and training camp season is fully underway. This is happening. I'm excited. I think there's going to be some big things that happen in training camp this year. Not from, like, I'm not saying like injury perspective or anything, but for some reason I just have this feeling that there's going to be a lot more guys that are going to show up on teams that we weren't really expecting. I for some reason I just have the feeling, based off of this year's draft, and this is why I bring this up. Like, so this year's draft, there was like a top 10 tier, right? There was like a top 10 player tier in this draft. And then really after 10, it was like from player 10 to player 350, it seemed like. They had the same amount of talent and like ceiling, right? I think there were players that were drafted in the fifth round that could have been, third or fourth rounders, and there was guys drafted in the fourth round that could have been second rounders, right? It really just depended on, feel and what people were looking for. But this was a really deep year when it came to talent coming into the NFL from college. And I'm pretty confident that there's going to be a lot more unrestricted rookie free agents that are going to have impacts on teams this year. Now, do I have any specific people in mind or names that I can think of off the top of my head that I feel like are going to be those sorts of players? Not yet, right? Let's let training camp, start, and let's see what happens, in these preseason games. But I think this is going to be a year where you're going to see some new names pop up, right? There's generally like a changing of the guard in pro sports. I think the NBA probably has this more so going on than the NFL right now. But you look at like LeBron, KD, Steph, James Harden, Kawhi, right? All those guys are getting older. Like, that is the generation of superstars right now. But in a year or 2 years, like, those names might be completely out of the NBA, and it's going to be a whole new regime. I don't think the NFL is quite at that turning point, but I do think that there is a lot of room now for people to make a name for themselves, and become the next generation of stars. And so I'm really curious to see what happens this week with training camp. Something fun that I'm going to do, just so that you guys all know, is I'm going to create like an all-pro training camp team. I'm not sure if any of you all have experienced this as a fan, but I've experienced this so many times. My friends can tell you how many times I've probably done this, but I always get really excited about players, right? Based off of who the media focuses on. I think every team has like one or two guys. Generally, it's like one offensive. Generally, it's another defensive player that, the media, the team media is really focusing on, right? They're making amazing catches, or they're breaking up passes, or intercepting the ball, or they're getting to the quarterback really quickly. Which, I mean, in training camp honestly means nothing because generally you're not wearing pads and you're not tackling, especially anymore. You might do a little bit of contact, but they're really trying to save these players nowadays because the season is longer, and the impact that the season has on these players is even more intense. But I am going to create like an all pro team based off of like who are the standouts in training camp. And so first thing, I would love to get your feedback and insight as to who you think will be on the All Pro training camp team. I think it'll be fun to put together. Maybe I'll do multiple tiers depending so that I can make sure to have a bunch of players from each team. Um, but I am curious to see who those standout guys are, and obviously if that translates to the regular season. In my experience, generally it doesn't, but who knows this year, right? And so, again, I'll definitely be making that. Those are the main things I wanted to cover today. If there's anything you feel like I should cover on Wednesday's show, let me know. I'd be excited to answer or reply to any questions, any feedback, any topics that you want me to cover. Mostly likely, I'll be talking about what's been going on around training camp. If there's any other news, I'll be making sure to look out and report on that. But again, that's what I had to cover today. I hope everyone is having a great day. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, like, comment, subscribe. This is Bad Takes from Bad Takes in Football, signing out.